Okay, so we're looking at the shift tower here in a 5-speed manual on a 2000 Volkswagen Golf TDI Mk4. And you know, I had such a hard time with this shift tower. I actually took the tower out. I wanted to give some pointers because I couldn't find anything online, on YouTube anyway. So basically, you'll remove your counterweight, which is this weird looking thing on top, and that's only one nut, so that nut there removes the counterweight. There's a clip below here. See if I can get the light. See that clip right there where my finger is? There's a clip. You pop out the bottom and slide it up the top, and then this slides out, this piece. When this slides out, if I can get my bearings right, there's two bushings inside this housing. One bushing stays on the shaft that's attached to this. The other bushing stays in the piece that's attached to this. So don't go nuts when you're looking for a bushing for 20 minutes wondering where the hell it went. It's on the shaft. It's on the shaft that's attached to that. So a lot of people having problems with these shifters. I bought some extra bushing, or better bushings, reinforced, whatever the hell you want to call them, aftermarket bushings, right? And I went to the boneyard and picked up these two assemblies so I could get these replaced. And I just didn't want to spend 50 bucks on two of these, right? So I replaced this and this off of a boneyard car. Mine had 400,000 miles on them and just looked like they look something like, if I can get the light right here, right there. So they're wore out. And shift tower, okay. There's two bolts holding the shift tower down, and it's hiding up underneath this assembly. There's a bolt on the left side, there's a bolt on the right side. Once you get this stuff out of the way, you'll see these two bolts. They are 13 millimeter. Now, you got to put, what I did, you see this little pin down here on the shift tower, it's pointing up. That's in the lock position for the shift tower. And so I put that pin in the lock position to hold that shift tower together. After I pulled those two bolts out, you can see one hiding right next to that lever there to lock the position. Anyway, you pull those out. This thing is a beast to get out. So I actually had to use a pry bar and carefully pry that shift tower out. So what's going on is there's a bushing inside the shift tower, and that bushing winds up wearing out, and it gives you a lot of play, and you really don't want that. So parts that came in I thought had the bushing for the shift tower. They didn't, because people on the phone don't understand what the hell you're talking about. So long story short, I'm gonna have to take this apart later and put in a new bushing in that shift tower. So when you go to take the shift tower out, what I did is I took a pry bar, went on the back side of this piece, which is still hooked up to the shift tower. You take this out, you pry up a little bit on that, and you go on the back side, you pry up a little bit on the back side. You'll see when you got it apart, but it's going to be stuck in there pretty tight. Now, reassembly, when you put your shift tower back together, is going to be tricky. Really take your time putting it back together. Mine was full of dirt because the nylon bushing wore out. Dirt was getting up underneath the assembly here and getting down into the shift tower, and it just was a mess. And grease was dried out and it was nasty. So I cleaned it all out, re-greased it, put it back together, and you got to really pay attention when you put it together. You got to make sure that your pin re-engages, that lock pin re-engages back into your assembly on your shift tower. And there's a spring in there that's just going to make life real fun for you to get that done. But if you're patient, it should just drop that pin right into the hole. You'll see when you take it apart. Just take a look at it when you take it apart. Take your time, don't freak out. And get that pin to relock into the housing inside. There's a spring in there. There's what looks like a kind of a mechanism. Looks like a weird looking socket with a bunch of grooves and stuff in it, so this thing can shift. And there's a detent spring inside there. So anyway, if you get that lock pin back in that shift assembly when you put it back together after you grease it, you'll be fine. The other thing is dropping this back into transmission. Nobody ever tells you there's a cup on the shift tower. It's a real pain in the ass. But that cup that's attached to the shift tower, hear what I'm saying, it's attached to the shift tower, and it has to sit down in a transmission. There's a tab on the cup that has to match a notch in a transmission on the left side if you're facing the car. So when you go to put your shift tower back in, you've got to get that cup tab lined up with a notch in the hole in the transmission. When you drop the shift tower in, that cup's got to get dropped in, which is spring loaded, and then you got to make sure you don't move your linkage inside the transmission, right? So you got to be careful with that. Make sure you drop that tower in straight. The cup lines up with a notch. Everything should sit down in there easily. There is a spring you got to deal with, but you should have this, when you put this back together, you should be able to hand tighten this and get that shift tower to drop down. If that shift tower does not drop down into its hole, you got something wrong by hand tightening it. Okay, so if you tighten that down and it's not lined up and you torque those bolts down, you're going to screw something up. So the cup has to be lined up. So there's a pointer for you on the shift tower on these things. Hopefully that helps some people.